This video is sponsored by Nebula. You might be thinking, why Falcon and the Winter Soldier now? Well, the truth is that I had planned for this video a while ago, and then I got less and less interested in the MCU to the point that I just didn't care anymore about making content about the MCU series. But then...
Good day, everyone. We're coming on the air with some sad breaking news. Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest reigning monarch, has died.
Queen Elizabeth II died, and I suddenly had a new flashpoint to discuss the larger theme that makes this show in particular so frustrating: the respectability politics of revolution. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we have the first series, post-Blip, that actually tries to address the long-term socio-political ramifications of a massive worldwide supernatural event, and then undoing it.
Okay, remember, everyone Thanos snapped away 5 years ago. We're just bringing them back to now, today. Don't change anything from the last 5 years.
And in the end, it decides that the status quo must change, but not too much, not too extremely, and not in a way that any of us can really define. And because that is kind of where we are in 2023, wanting to change things, but having this constant swithering about what to do, how to make the change, and what counts as revolutionary and what just counts as violence. You know who's not ready to start a revolution? Disney. Except apparently with Andor. This is going to be me talking about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the problems with the storylines, the reason why the politics of it really suck, especially considering the comic book characters that they are platforming, and just my overall frustrations with the MCU and where it is right now in Phase 4. This video is sponsored by Nebula. It has always been a great resource for myself and other creators who are trying to do interesting and compelling work while not having to worry about the algorithm. Right now on Nebula Originals, I am working on finally getting Anime Court up and running. We will have 2 inaugural videos coming up this month, which I'm very excited about. And if you sign up for Nebula using the link down below, you can get Nebula for a little over $3 a month. You also get Nebula Classics now included when you sign up for Nebula with no additional charge. I know that there are a billion streaming services and it can all seem very overwhelming. All I will say is that for me, Nebula has been, for myself and many other streamers who are a part of it, a place where we can talk about things without the worry of the algorithm. Maggie Mayfish is coming out with an entire mini season about sex in cinema and censorship, something that she would not have been able to do to the full extent that she could have if she had been doing it on YouTube. The other thing I want to talk about today is SBG, the Smart Brown Girl Book Club. I'm going to be running a fundraiser on this video for them because not only am I, full disclosure, someone who really cares and respects Julesy as a creator, I think it's a really great space. I am a Patreon of Julesy, so I get a lot of access to the book club, and it's not just about finding a book, it's about creating a community of dialogue and having deeper analysis of the work and creating an international community of women of color through this reading. And as somebody who talks a lot and thinks a lot about the way in which not only that we read, but how we've learned to read things, I just think it's a great resource. And finally, last and certainly not least, I have to plug my own Patreon. I have been slow on the main because I've been trying to basically build up my resources since this is now my full-time job. I'm trying to work a balance, but I have been doing a lot on Patreon. We've had several movie nights and watch commentaries, and we are getting the Witcher Book Club up and running. Everyone's finally got their books. Just more fun stuff, and if you have the time, I highly recommend joining. But anyway, I will let you guys all relax, and let's get back to yelling about this show that could have been so much better, and yet was not. Set 6 months after Sam Wilson is handed the mantle of Captain America from Joe Biden, the series revolves around Wilson teaming up with Bucky Barnes to stop an anti-patriotism group called the Flag Smashers, who are enhanced with a recreation of the super soldier serum and believe that the world was a better place during the blip and are fighting for open national borders. It attempts to deal very heavily on the historical and political implications of Sam Wilson, a Black American man, being the new Cap. It also attempts to deal with the political fallout of something like the blip.
We can't let the same arseholes who were put back in power after the blip win. The GRC care more about the people who came back than the ones who never left.
An event where half of the world disappeared and then came back due to the events of Endgame 5 years later. Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan reprised their roles of Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, with newcomers Wyatt Russell as John Walker, Captain America Part 2, U.S. Agent Aaron Kellerman as Carly Morgenthau, the leader of the Flag Smashers, Carl Lumbly, Icon as Isaiah Bradley, Daniel Bruet returns as Baron Zemo, Emily Van Camp as Sharon Carter, and Florence Kasumba as Io. When it comes to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the most frustrating thing about it is that it cannot truly dive deeply into any of the many topics it's discussing, from imperialism to anarchy to centrism, racism, the military, PTSD. It's trying to cover several really important things in 6 episodes, and 6 episodes that, despite the runtime, end about 10 to 15 minutes early because they need to highlight the amazing people who brought this show together. But it also means that it has a very, very tight runtime that's including all of this information, but not getting the breadth to discuss it. I mean, easily, this is a 13 episode season. You know, I think of the Netflix Marvel shows, and I just think this show, of any of them, needed that runtime. So rather than have a series that explores any of these topics well, you have a series that tackles all of these poorly, and it accumulates to just making the entire thing feel like a schlock, while also having to exist within the scope of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is in itself a very narrow playing field for any creator coming into it. And that is becoming more and more apparent as these programs, whether they be movies or shows, progress. I think maybe Hawkeye and She-Hulk are probably the two with the best ability to be creative despite everything, but they still have their own ups and downs. I also think that wanting a show like this to be for most ages really hinders it. This really should be an adult series, and it's limited in its scope by not being able to be that. Because this series came out this many years ago, we're gonna first go through with a quick recap of the episodes. Episode 1, New World Order. Sam doesn't feel like the shield belongs to him, probably because it's filled with imperialist germs. Sam is brought into a mission to stop terrorist group LAF, who have hijacked a plane and have taken a hostage, and he has to get to the hostage before they go over the border. It goes fine. Then Sam has a black sidekick conversation with Rhodey.
It's a new day, brother.
After deciding to give Steve Rogers' shield to the US government for a museum display. Why? I don't know. Send that shit back to Wakanda. Sam's sister Sarah is irritated that Sam wants to keep up the family fishing business in Louisiana when they are broke, and he has not been able to be involved in running the company.
You had to go off and fight armies and monsters, and I appreciate that. But you don't get to come back here and try to right your wrongs just because you couldn't deal with what was going on here.
Bucky has been pardoned, is going to therapy, still having nightmares, and is trying to make amends for having been a brainwashed assassin. Except he chooses to befriend one of the people he is trying to make amends to. Johan Torres investigates the Flag Smashers and is hurt when he witnesses them robbing a bank in Switzerland. Episode ends with the government giving the mantle of Captain America to John Walker, who has the face of a morally compromised character, which we will call Kurt Russell face, because Kurt Russell is his father, in case you didn't catch that little bit of Nepo baby casting. Episode 2, The Star-Spangled Man. Captain All Lives Matter and his very own black sidekick are now running things and end up running into Bucky and Sam in a very awkward moment of like, wait, but I'm the token.
Well, I'm supposed to be the only black guy at this party.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I know. It's whack.
Hey, man, my bad, man. No doubt. Why don't you take this, man?
Thanks.
All right? Do your thing?
Hey.
Yep. Peace out, brother.
Hey, honest mistake.
Sam and Bucky are in Munich investigating the Flag Smashers who are stealing a shipment of medicine. The Flag Smashers escape. Walker wants to work with Barnes and Wilson, but they can smell the anti-hero on him, so they know it's not a great look for their brand, and they say no.
I'm just trying to be the best Captain America I can be. It'd be a whole lot easier if I had Cap's wingman at my side.
And I do enjoy how Bucky is like, I will not allow a white Captain America again. Bucky, because he knows where Negroes congregate after his Wakanda exposure, brings Sam to Baltimore and introduces him to Isaiah Bradley, the black Captain America who became a super soldier during the Korean War. He was experimented on by the US government and by Hydra, and therefore ain't helping anybody with shit.
Sam, why didn't you tell me about Isaiah? How could nobody bring him up? I asked you a question, Bucky.
I know.
Steve didn't know about him?
He didn't. I didn't tell him.
So you're telling me that there was a black super soldier decades ago and nobody knew about it?
And since he is played by legend, respect on his name, Carl Lumbly, you are getting some excellent cranky old black man from him. Bucky gets arrested for missing therapy, but Walker has him released. Bucky still doesn't want to work with New Metal Captain America, so that attempt at friendship has been denied. After that, Bucky suggests to Sam that they visit the imprisoned Baron Zemo. If you don't remember, he killed King T'Chaka, so it's on site. Episode 3, Power Broker. They break out Zemo because he knows all about super soldiers, and apparently they don't have just a Wikipedia file or resources of any kind that don't involve them having to go break out a supervillain, and I guess Bucky wants to show off his skills or whatever. Zemo is a very charismatic character. I'm not going to deny it. But as I said before, he killed our beloved King T'Chaka, so it's on site. They break him out, and Baron Zemo is like, I'm rich, bitch, so we're going to travel in style.
So all this time you've been rich?
I'm a baron, Sam. My family was royalty until your friends destroyed my country.
So they fly in a very nice plane to Madripoor, discuss Marvin Gaye.
I like 40s music, so.
You didn't like it?
I liked it.
It is a masterpiece, James. Complete, comprehensive. It captures the African-American experience.
And end up meeting with Sharon Carter, who has been living on the island in exile because apparently no one pardoned her for helping Steve. And I have questions.
What's going on, Sharon? You don't ever want to come back home?
They'll lock me up if I step foot back in the States. Madripoor doesn't allow extradition.
I'm sorry I didn't call.
The Avengers suck. Worst group ever. No healthcare, no insurance. They will leave your ass stranded for 5 years. But still, she is going to be a nice white lady, and she helps direct them towards the lab of this guy named Dr. Nagel. And he explains that he created 20 doses of the super serum, which was stolen by Carly and the Flag Smashers, which is why they are knucking and bucking all over the place. A bunch of bounty hunters attack them, and Sharon gets to finally show that she is a very competent fighter. Shout out to her because she keeps getting overlooked by her categorically less interesting aunt. I said what I said. I do not understand the gorilla grip that Peggy Carter has over you guys. To the bisexuals, yes, because it doesn't take much, okay? Because Natalie Dormer still got it, and she, you know, I get it, but not enough for all of this. It's too much. It's too much, man. Sam promises her that he'll get her a pardon, but I'm still sitting here wondering why she wasn't pardoned in the first place. Again, the Avengers suck. The Flag Smashers bombed the Global Repatriation Council in Lithuania, and this is kind of the moment we're supposed to be like, oh my god, the Flag Smashers, they have gone too far. Except it's been 3 episodes, and really, all of their rhetoric, none of their rhetoric has really been properly explained. But we're going to put a pin in that. But this is the moment that we're supposed to fundamentally turn against them and say, you're killing innocent people. It doesn't matter what you're doing it for. At the end of the episode, we thankfully get some melanin because Io, a member of the Dora Milaje, comes through. And Bucky, again, he has that swirler detection ability. So he can sense where a fine black girl is within at least 15 feet. So bing, bing, bing. He is ready and he goes up to talk to the homegirl because he's like, hey girl. Episode 4, the whole world is watching. Io pulls up to Bucky and is like, the fuck is wrong with you? We deprogrammed you, fixed your lace, made sure your arm was all good, and then you let the guy who killed our beloved king go. She gives him an 8-hour clock just because, you know, Loving V Virginia tease. And Zemo helps find Carly, who's at the funeral for her adoptive mother figure, and Walker and his token black best friend are both there. It's very exhausting.
You're a supremacist.
That's ridiculous. Everything I do is to end supremacy.
Sam tries to do it the civil way, but then Walker comes and has to escalate things. During the attack, Zemo gets the drop on Carly, rolls initiative, and she drops the serum, and Zemo is like, yes, fucking yes, and just starts stomping and crushing all of the serum all over the place. It's very funny. And then Walker comes, knocks out Zemo, and slips one dose into his pocket. But before he can shoot up in trying to assert dominance over Sam and Bucky, ends up getting in the middle of their conflict with Dora Milaje and gets his ass handed to him.
We should do something.
Looking strong, John.
Okay, just like Andrew Tate. Granted. He gets defeated by the Dora Milaje, who are not super soldiers, so he's really in his feelings. And Bucky is loving it until he himself has to take an L when Io literally disarms him and his face goes into a surprised Pikachu expression. And then between this and another incident, Walker decides to take the serum and they have another fight with Carly, and she accidentally kills his black BFF, who is the Ash from Lost Girl, and Walker is like, not my bestie.
Sorry.
And he kills one of the Flag Smashers. I believe his name is Nico. Rest in peace. And everyone sees it, and that's where you get that iconic shot of him with the bloody shield. It's very Bodak yellow, and it is probably one of the best moments in this show just because of the sheer brutality and imagery of it, but it's still not great. Episode 5, Truth. After Walker gets caught in 4K and gets the shield taken from him by Sam, he is called in by the government. The government is like, listen, I know we send you in other countries to destabilize them and destroy them, and you probably got raging PTSD, and we got you out here having a whole, you know, emotional cosplay complex, but you're not supposed to be taped on camera doing war crimes.
You built me, Senator. I am Captain America.
Not anymore.
So essentially, despite doing basically what he has been trained to do, he is stripped of his power. But it's okay because Selena Mayer comes in.
I mean, you would have been doing him a favor if you'd taken out the whole lot. But these guys in ties, you know, they got a whole thing to protect.
And does whatever Julia Louis-Dreyfus decides to do in this role. Like, I don't like this character, nor how she plays her, but Julia Louis-Dreyfus is very fine, and so I will just deal with it. Bucky finds Zemo and gives him to the Dora Milaje, and Zemo is taken to Wakandan jail. Bucky has the audacity to ask for one more favor, and I don't know why they give it to him, but he must have put it down somewhere, so we're just gonna have to go with it. Sam decides to visit Isaiah Bradley, and he is like, sir, why are you so angry, black man who fought for America in the military and then got kidnapped and tortured and tested on like a piece of cattle? Why are you so upset?
I need to understand.
You understand. Every black man does, whether you want to deny it or not.
Don't do that bitter old man thing with me.
Why does the show have Sam talking like he's only been black for like the amount of time he's been on screen? Like, my brother in Christ, you were asking why a black super soldier that you have never heard of is mad. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I will say, just to put this one thing in here, I don't really love how they take Isaiah Bradley's storyline and like squash it into one episode of just him expositioning. I really feel like this could have definitely been a full flashback episode of Bradley talking all about the trauma and violence that was put against him. The comic book that it's based on is, you know, it's not perfect, but it is an iconic piece of black comic book history, and I really think that they could have done this a lot better and made it about him and not just having his story give Sam motivation to, like, I guess, lean into the community, because that seems to be what he does. Because after Isaiah Bradley explains all of the trauma that happened to him, Sam decides to go home and help his sister with their family fishboat. Bucky comes because he wants to be part of Sam's family, and if he can't be with Sam, Sam's sister is fine, and she is right there, okay? Bucky Barnes has only been attracted to one white person ever, and that's Steve Rogers. That's it.
Want any help? I'm Bucky.
Sam.
Bucky and Sam have a tete-a-tete about race where Bucky apologizes to Sam like, damn, me, Bucky Barnes, a white man from the 1940s, had no idea how blackness worked for you. I know I've been alive for 106 years, but I never read a People's History of America, so I didn't get how serious this was. My bad.
When Steve told me what he was planning, I don't think either of us really understood what it felt like for a black man to be handed the shield. How could we? I owe you an apology. I'm sorry.
We find out that the Flag Smashers are going to take over at Congress in New York City, so they're going to go and settle this whole thing now. And during the mid-credits, we see that, you know, new metal Captain America is out here looking like Bob the Builder, trying to fashion his own shield out of, like, whatever the fuck he's got. Episode 6, One World, One People. Final episode of the season, Sam appears to save the day in an ugly-ass suit. They should have at least given him, like, the Juneteenth colors or just red and white, because this whole thing is just so ugly.
I'm sorry, Toots. I guess you're too ugly.
Sometimes I don't mind it as colorful. I just wish they had, like, tempered the colors for his melanin. All of a sudden, Walker comes in and is good, I guess? They all work together finally to defeat the Flag Smashers, and then we find out, oh shit, it's Sharon. She's the power broker, and she is mad as fuck because she got screwed over by the American government. And you know what? I get it, because they have treated Sharon's character like dust because of Peggy Carter got them in some kind of colonizer guerrilla group or whatever. So she's upset. And when I said that her getting screwed over by the government made her into a villain, I was like, okay, bitch. I see you. I understand. And I'd like to formally welcome her into the good for her universe because I think she's really killing it through this. Carly gets shot by Sharon, which she does get a knock for because I don't want her to kill this little brown girl. And Sam does his best attempt at a Picard speech about what it means to be human and what the government should do for its people and how if you keep doing this, you're going to have more Flag Smashers. Of course, you know, it's just words.
We finally have a common struggle now. For once, all the people who've been begging, and I mean literally begging for you to feel how hard any given day is, now you know.
He goes to Isaiah Bradley and presents him with a statue. No reparations though. Sorry the government misused you, abused you, made you lose your entire family and everything, and you lost contact with all your loved ones, but here's a little monument in this building that I don't even think is the African American Museum in the Smithsonian, girl. The rest of the captured super soldiers are killed by not Alfred, who is Zemo's butler. Walker is now made the U.S. agent. Bucky makes amends, and that stops him from securing one of his swirl bags. But, you know, he's grown, and Sarah's right there. He gonna be okay. Now Sam and Bucky are together and are the new Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Racism is solved, and nothing about the political climate of the MCU has been changed. Disney! It can be frustrating for folks who are just enjoying the MCU and the incarnations of the characters it has created to be constantly told by nerds like me to look at the comics, especially since the comics themselves are not perfect. They too have had to grow and evolve over time, which is for me the fundamental issue. We've already seen a lot of progress in terms of characters of color and queer characters in comics. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. We'll have issues forever. I mean, by Thor's fade. However, it is more than we have gotten in the MCU, and therefore it can be jarring to watch a product like Falcon and the Winter Soldier and see how conservative it is in comparison to what has come before it in other mediums. Let's look at Black comic book superheroes. If we look at Superman as our cornerstone, he is the first real big superhero in comics, and he was created in 1938. When we look at the first black superheroes of note and who is the first really can depend on who did what. For DC, we have Bumblebee and Nubia, who are both at times considered the first black female superhero, depending on how specific you want to use the term superhero. You have Luke Cage in 1972, who then inspired DC to make Black Lightning in 1977. T'Challa, Black Panther, who appeared in 1966, is the first African superhero in mainstream comics, followed by Falcon in 1969, who is the first African American. Blade would follow in 1973. Jon Stewart's Green Lantern in 1971, and Storm in 1975, who would become sort of the tentpole and major black female superhero character, despite not being the first. Black superheroes in comics were explicitly created to tap into the urban market that was very popular in the era, but also to be political depending on who the writer was. Both Kirby and Lee have debated about who created Black Panther, and we know that Lee can be a little generous with his input. But regardless, the point that they both make when you read conversations that they had was that they existed to fill the gap that existed when it came to black superheroes. Panther's Rage, the multi-issue story arc, is considered to be one of the first graphic novel stories by Marvel. Late icon Dwayne McDuffie said of this iconic run, "This overlooked and underrated classic is arguably the most tightly written, multi-part superhero epic ever. If you can get your hands on it, sit down and read the whole thing. It's damn near flawless. Every issue, every scene, a functional, necessary part of the whole." Okay, now go back and read any individual issue. You'll find seamlessly integrated words and pictures, clearly introduced characters and situations, a concise, sometimes even transparent recap, beautifully developed character relationship, and at least one cool new villain, a stunning action set piece to test our hero's skills and resolve, and a story that is always moving forward towards a definitive and satisfying conclusion. That's what we should all be delivering every single month. Don McGregor and company did it in only 17 story pages per issue. In Super Black, American Pop Culture and Black Superheroes, it says, whether obscure or prominent, the first wave of black superheroes in DC and Marvel comics drew their raison d'etre from racial conflict. In an effort to address the dramatic shift occurring in American society, black superheroes were created in creative and artistic ways that symbolize the racial climate. They were hip black heroes with a streetwise agenda to clear drug dealers out of the ghettos that they defended. Like the films that inspired them, the blaxploitation heroes of comics did not last very long, because comic book fans are well aware of the medium's history. It has been hard for publishers to shrug off the ghost of the jive-talking blaxploitation heroes. That's why you get that pimp line from Sam in the show, because guess whose character was a pimp at one point?
If we have to do something about this, I'm the only one who looks like a pimp.
Only an American would assume a fashion-forward black man looks like a pimp.
Luke Cage is a black man who is wrongly imprisoned. Jefferson Pierce is a school teacher whose community is overrun by drugs, brought into the area by a malicious government. Aurora loses her family as a result of international conflict, etc., and so forth. All of these are political characters whose work is rooted in political racial history, including Falcon, who as the first African-American superhero always existed to provide a juxtaposition between the American dream and the black man's place in America. Black superheroes may lack in mainstream popularity. They more than match in symbolism, meaning, and political import with regard to the cultural politics of race in America. Even the omission and chronic marginalization of black superheroes are phenomena rife with cultural and socio-political implications. But it would be a mistake to assume that comics only tackle politics through blackness or marginalization, or that they have only become woke now, which again, hate the term woke being used in any kind of way, but if we're gonna use it, you want to talk about woke comics? Dennis O'Neil and Neal Adams' Green Lantern, Green Arrow from the 1970s is probably one of the most politically woke things you could get from two white men writing in the 70s. People might forget this because Arrow made Oliver Queen in the public mainstream eye just blonde Batman, but one of his notable character traits in the comics is being very liberal. And Hal Jordan, the not first but most prominent Green Lantern of a certain time, was a conservative. You know, he's literally a space cop. And this series was kind of like Purple Hearts, but better. It has this famous, infamous moment where a black man comes up to Hal Jordan and asks him why he hasn't done anything for the black man. Now, when you read this comic series, and I have, there are a lot of moments where you're like, 2 white men wrote this. And they are cringe in the same way where a lot of the allegories between race with Magneto and Kitty would be very cringe because you knew what they were saying, but they were saying in such a way that was obviously leading towards a white audience that it is very... An attempt was made, kinda. And they love to write out black dialogue in what they think is black dialect, and not even I'm brave enough to do that in my own writing. However, it was revolutionary in the fact that it was a series that directly called out white characters for their failure to be heroes to all people. Black people, indigenous people, Asian people, and part of that was also removing responsibility to just black superheroes. Instead of Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and Black Canary leading the charge to end racism as superheroes, they symbolize the needs for whites to take ownership of their white privilege, acknowledge their feelings of guilt, and most importantly, strive for personal transformation. Ultimately, the comic suggested that the most viable solution for ending racism in America was for its white citizenry to become introspective and mindful of their racial prejudices, a solution that did not require one to possess superhuman powers. This is kind of a big thing that you see comics struggle with, wanting to tell big racial stories, fumbling the bag because, again, these are mostly white writers. But I use these as examples to say that we already have a history of comics having messy, out of touch, but well-meaning allegory and discourse about race in their comics. And politics. Comic books are very political. And that means that we have a foundation for modern writers, creators, and artists to build within the genre and learn from these mistakes. There is no fundamental excuse for the conservative politics of the MCU other than by moving from comics to a big audience and trying to have the biggest audience. It means you can't stand for a lot or be too radical. You know, the O'Neal run of Green Lantern and Green Arrow didn't last very long, nor the Cloak and Dagger, but it was allowed to tell these stories, and that's what's important. They were allowed to be made, they were allowed to have an impact, and they were allowed to be political. And while it's heartbreaking for an artist when a run gets canceled, it doesn't mean that it won't have an impact in the future, especially nowadays where we have the access to go back and find all these stories. I found the O'Neal, Green Lantern, Green Arrow series through doing research about this very topic. And I think it's important to remember that comics were created in large by first and second generation Jewish immigrants fleeing anti-Semitic society. When you read the first issues of Superman, he is very much, you know, a FDR liberal. You know, one of the people he fights is a corrupt, you know, a union buster. He fights in favor of the everyman. Those are the cores of what these comic book characters is about. And slowly that has been erased. And the otherness that was built into comics was whittled away. And now we have a very hyper conservative tilt over it because of how closely the MCU is tied with the military and, to a larger degree, the kind of conservative whiteness of people who still want to gatekeep comics for a mostly white audience. Radical comics can have an audience, make its money back, and be a risk. You can cancel the comic. A radical movie or show could lose precious Mickey Mouse money, and we can't have that. If you just go back to the first Iron Man,
I came to realize that I have more to offer this world than just making things that blow up. And that is why, effective immediately, I am shutting down the weapons manufacturer division of Stark International.
But we never talk about the damage that the military has done with those weapons or hold the military directly responsible for how they continue to try and weaponize his products after he wants to cancel it. Carol Danvers can't just be in the Air Force. We have to make the film work as a recruitment tool for the military, which is not necessary to tell this story. When you need to align with the systems of power in order to make your films, you can't be revolutionary.
When we first came together, I mean, what were the chances that we'd all be assigned to the same quarter? To find people I would have never met, people that I would have been taught to hate if I lived somewhere else.
The Flag Smasher was a singular character created by Mark Grunwald and Paul Neary to be the ideological opposite of Captain America. Shocker. The character is anti-nationalist. That's it. They are not a communist or an anarchist or even a fascist. They are just anti-nationalism. In comparison, the Flag Smashers on Falcon and the Winter Soldier are labeled as anarchists. They are shown as being violent for a specific cause, which ties into the desire to create a more unified global world.
One world.
One people.
One world.
One people.
One world.
One people.
Zemo says that the super serum only made Steve better. So it has this subtext that the serum has only made Carly more Machiavellian in her desire to create what she views as a better world. The problem is that we never actually sit down and discuss and engage with the politics of the Flag Smashers. We have a small tete-a-tete between Carly and Sam, but it kind of goes around the issue. It's kind of like the villains in The Legend of Korra. You know, you set up these complex political antagonists who complicate the reality of this fantastical world, and then you just kill them and never really bring up or discuss what created them and what impact that they had on the world beyond just the end of the season. We don't really see much of the blip reality in Endgame before things are undone. We are told that there are, dolphins in the huts, and a lot of the loss is expressed in the personal level of people having lost their spouses, their children, their friends. But because the scope is already so big, and there's time travel and all these kind of shenanigans, there is no time to ask what all of this means in a larger way. We need to get everyone back and, be damned what has the consequence. And that is something worth examining in a miniseries like this. Except it's too big of a stake to even get to that part. You need something between the Flag Smashers existing and the end of Endgame. You need to have a more grounded personal series about what this means, which would have been great for someone like Daredevil or Jessica Jones or Luke Cage, but they don't exist anymore, so we can only do these heavy level stories. And a lot of these issues also come from the pandemic. The first film to address the post-Blip reality was Spider-Man, No Way Home? Far From Home? Far From Home, and the amount of serious implications were so small that it almost felt like the blip was pointless. There is no financial implication for Peter or Aunt May because MCU Peter Parker isn't poor, which I hate. And it's just kind of like, we're back, and like some people are secretly older and hot, but everyone on the core team aged normally, so everything is fine. WandaVision is focused on Wanda's post-grief, but all that could have happened at any time and isn't necessarily blip focused. Clint is doing fine now with his family being back. He just has ugly tattoos and a little bit of trauma that, tracksuit red shirts from his murder of ethnic people. And for Loki, due to the timeline issues, it might as well not exist for him. Falcon is our one true political centering of the MCU, and it does nothing to actually explore what it would mean to have such a massive global restructuring twice in 5 years. We have just lived through a pandemic, and it feels like nothing will ever be the same, which makes this thing even harder to understand. To have nations be able to pour resources into people and then yank them away because the rest of humanity has returned? Gentrification in New York, 101, baby. I mean, remember when all the prices went down in major cities because people were fleeing and now they're back and now everything's going crazy again? By the time we get to Carly and the Flag Smashers, they're already so far gone in their ideology that they are only seen as a far left response to a problem. And that's really sad because there is something really interesting there to examine, and if we took the time to do it, it would create a fuller story. Nor is there anything to tell us that if Carly hadn't chosen violence, the government would be working on this stuff anyway. One thing I think is really important to talk about is the Global Repatriation Council, and its entire point is to help these people who have been displaced find new homes. We rarely see the GRC doing anything, but one scene in particular I see very telling.
Reset, restore, rebuild.
Now, in this moment, we see Walker and the police in a sort of police state being used by the Global Repatriation Council to basically work as police state for these people. We never at any point see them doing any kind of aid. We don't see them doing anything to help the people involved. So why are we supposed to believe that what is being done now is extreme when nothing, as far as we are shown, has been done to help anybody? And I think that's the thing that is so frustrating, especially as we look at this show as it kind of goes across the landscape that we've been living in. A lot of people saying a lot of really good words, saying they want change, and then nothing happens. People will talk about how horrified they are by police brutality one moment, but then also say that they feel uncomfortable with terms like defund the police. And then we see the police commit murder on an unarmed black man again, and it's all, wow. And I find that Falcon and the Winter Soldier, while it tries to do a lot of things, really lacks any sort of critical semblance about what it means to be, in a lot of ways, a cop of the superhero world. Like, Falcon joined the military, and he has been, as an Avenger, gets privileges. I mean, when he goes to the bank in that one scene, thinking he's going to get a loan, and he gets a lot of, shooking and driving, like, oh my God, it's Falcon.
Funny how things always tighten around us.
Whoa, easy there. Look, I'm on your side. After all, he's a hero. Is there any chance, and of course you could say no, that I could get a selfie with your arms out?
Are you serious?
Just the lack of awareness that Sam seems to have. And it's interesting, like, as he talks to Carly and tries to catch her in a gotcha about how she's fighting corporations, but she's building an army and she's going to be equally as bad. And what I find so interesting is that he's doing the same thing that you see people do, these kind of hypotheticals about what kind of violence is too much violence in the world, and how violent are you allowed to be in defense of your personhood. And I find it so interesting that these gotchas are all being said about, all right, you're doing this, but I want to go to Sam and say, like, well, what are you doing? You've been gone for 5 years because you got blipped. You haven't been around to help out your own family, and now you want to tell all these people living through what we can only assume to be one of the most destabilizing moments in their lives, and saying, but what about what you're doing?
The people I'm fighting are trying to take your home, Sam. Why are you here instead of stopping them?
And my sister's waiting for that exact same answer. I'm not your enemy. I agree with your fight. I just can't get with the way you're fighting it.
And I think it's so telling, and I think about this all the time, about how we use all these gotchas and hypocrisy stamping and, oh, well, you're insinuating this, to work around the ultimate topic of, so what are you willing to do to protect marginalized people? Every time this comes up, I think, and I really mean this, so you think slaves should have just sat there and waited for everything to just kind of like get better. So you're saying every black person that ever did anything with the slave revolt, any marginalized person, any indigenous people who ever fought to defend their land and their people and their way of life in the face of what we all know is imperialism, genocide, and just emotional and cultural distress, they're all bad people and they should have just waited for things to get better. What's the answer? And that's what makes the story of the Flag Smashers and how it's depicted in this show so frustrating, is that we saw people who were at the edges of humanity trying to scrape out something for themselves. And the moments of empathy that are brought into the story are only used to paint them in a more malicious light than a government with more power and more resources and more superheroes that is keeping them in these margins.
She taught me that we have to do for each other, because they won't. We know who they are. They impose struggle and hardship on us, then labeled us as criminals for pushing back. But the struggle is what brings us all together, people who have nothing in common. For we are, after all, simply one world and one people.
Carly and the Flag Smashers are doing something that has happened time and time again. When downtrodden people rise up against an oppressive force, they are demonized. They are revolting. They are having a revolution. But the problem is that in the 21st century, we don't really have a desire to see that. in the West anymore. Revolution is for the old days. That's for the developing nations that we codified down and down again. We don't want revolutions in the modern world. We don't want a war on European land. That would be traumatic. And what good does revolution do anyway, you know? The French, they brought back the monarchy twice, and it took like 7 baby revolutions for it to stick. Because Les Miserables is not about the French Revolution. It's about one of many tiny revolutions. Slave revolutions. Well, you know, Haiti is free, but look how in debt they are. And it's America. We won against England, but we did it with political allies from France who didn't gut our economy because we wanted to free ourselves from enslavement. You know, we were a structured revolution where the main people revolting were landowners who were losing money because of their taxes, and they needed to protect their land. And I think it's really funny to think about how, in response to being overly taxed, in response to having a military cop environment around them, of not being represented in their government, the American Revolution happened. But when Black people act in response to the very same issues, wow, what could that be?
Fortunately, there are not enough men of property in America to dictate policy.
Perhaps not. But don't forget that most men with nothing would rather protect the possibility of becoming rich than face the reality of being poor.
And that is why they will follow us
to the right, never to the right, never to the left.
It's easy for media to be anti-revolutionary, even in a fantasy series, because people are afraid of being made uncomfortable, of having to sacrifice things. People fundamentally want to believe that change will just come if we vote right this one time. And before you start, I am not saying don't vote. I am just saying that if we try to do anything but that, well, we become expendable, disposable radicals.
The idea that calling something violent is itself a kind of metaphorical weapon. Violent people are not usually thought of as having the right to self-defense. If somebody attacks you and you fight back and they kill you, they can't claim self-defense because they started it. So by calling someone violent, you imply that they don't have the right to resist. Politicians and journalists will sell you policies making that move on everything from policing to workers' rights to interpretation of your own country's history.
Last year, after Queen Elizabeth II died, I watched The Crown, and one episode that stuck out to me was episode 6 of season 3. In the episode, Prince Charles, now King Charles III, God, that never stops being weird. Ugh, a king in this economy? Girl, whew. Is sent to Wales to learn how to speak the language in order to deliver his speech, solidifying him as the investiture of the Prince of Wales. There's a very good video by Tea with Lindsay about the history of the Prince of Wales title, which, imperialism, please, God, I really want the rest of the UK to revolt. Is it just me, like Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland? Get this shit done, okay? Irish unification of 2024.
Yet there are numerous examples when it was successful. The independence of the Mexican state from Spain, the Irish unification of 2024, and the Kenzie Rebellion.
Yes, I'm aware of them.
Then would it be accurate to say that terrorism is acceptable when all options for peaceful settlement have been foreclosed?
Data, these are questions that mankind has been struggling with throughout history. Your confusion is only human.
Of course, he is trained by a Welsh nationalist who takes pity on Charles because he's just so love-starved. He just needs his mom to love him. And it's all, look how sad the royal family is, and this young Prince of Wales who didn't even know about the destruction of a Welsh-speaking village that was put underwater in order to build a reservoir for Liverpool.
The government drowned it. A new reservoir to provide drinking water for Liverpool, England. And so one of the last fully Welsh-speaking villages in the land now rests quietly at the bottom of a lake.
He is sad about it, but never cares to do anything about it ever since. And I couldn't help but wonder, thank you, Carrie. I couldn't help but wonder when I was watching the show is that how have we forgotten all the things that we have lost under the tides of imperialist governments? You know, not just fascism, but just what it means to think that one group, because it is not as powerful as you, because once upon a time it was conquered by you, that their language, their people, their titles are just yours to diddle with, to play with, to use as little chips to give your little Nepo babies and be like, hey, you're important. Here's a literally a throne we stole from a whole other community. Bye. There were people who were protesting and making political arguments outside the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, and they were being arrested for that. People kept saying, oh, it's our Nan who died. It's like, it's not your Nan. She's got like 18 grandchildren. She doesn't need you.
It's disgusting again how, you know, the kind of news of the royal family completely overtakes the news agenda and everything else that is affecting millions of regular people in this country.
And for that to happen in democracy is an embarrassment. You know, England's wealth is about power that came from colonization, not just of brown countries, but also from other white countries. Hell, the monarchy in England is based on a conqueror from fucking Normandy. Yet despite all of this, when you see polls about the future of the monarchy in the UK, and when I talk to people from the UK about this, they all say that, like, they know the monarchy sucks, but they can't be bothered. So, and one of the things I find so funny is that every monarch show I've ever watched post the era of Oliver Cromwell is like, the British just don't revolt.
The Charters want the vote. Not a republic.
Well, how can we be so sure?
Because we are English, Albert. We may grumble, we may protest. We are not a revolutionary people.
I felt this way while I was watching Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, and I guess spoiler alert here. To me, what was interesting about watching the discourse about Wakanda Forever is that people were framing it as like, oh, indigenous people versus black people. And I'm like, that to me is not the conflict. The conflict is between a society, the Wakandans, that have never dealt with imperialism and colonization, just isolationist through and through, did not have to deal with the slave trade, not have to deal with, you know, all the issues that black diasporans deal with, versus a society that exists explicitly because of imperialism and colonization, and how that changes the mentality of what you will do to protect your people, and how that can put you in conflict with people who should be your allies. That's a conversation. That's a discussion to have. And to have it be just torn down to the black people are fighting the indigenous people is just kind of like, that's not the point. And rather than have the CIA be the ultimate bad guys, it's this conflict. And it trickles down to how we talk about it in the media. And I find that to be so frustrating, but so telling, that rather than have a thoughtful conversation about how imperialism and colonization and resources create these devastating consequences for black and brown people, it becomes a war of personality. And it's easy to do that because we oversimplify things, and we mostly want to feel safe. So we can have global protests about George Floyd 2 years ago, then have racist law and order legislation winning again, to have critical race theory now be a dog whistle, to have, you know, the progress of some rights for queer people, and now seeing the trans community and the drag community and all these communities that are impacted by infighting suddenly have their entire identities being politicized by everybody else. We have lost the ability to have collective rage and collective desire to do something about it. And it's hard to watch. And it's hard to watch shows that are taken from some of the most important characters in comics that look like us and have them just thrown in to back up the military-industrial complex, to side with law and order, with truth and justice, and not acknowledge that those things are concepts. They are not reality for everybody. And so when I watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier and I watch these things, I think about it in this cultural landscape that we're in. I think about this video that Philosophy Tube did a while ago about these climate activists, and like, we don't want to call for violence, but when are we going to call for the right to be mad without being polite about it? Because Carly, for all of her flaws, was a child who was weaponized by a white woman and took power to try and help who she saw were being underserved people. And at any point, someone with actual power could have reached out to her and figured something out or actually addressed the issues in a serious way. And that's not what happened. And all we focus on is the violence of a building and innocent people being killed in that way. But all of the innocent people that are being killed by passive indifference, that's seen as a acceptable death. And I think that's the real thing we need to start addressing. Why is it violent to fight against an oppressive system, and that can be demonized, but to passively enable the deaths of countless people is okay? Because at least you didn't blow anything up.